Welcome everybody to a quick shot on the Martinis with Scott channel. When I was in business school for the first time, in the first week as a new student, the dean of the business school at the time called together all first year students. There was about 400 of us and gave a speech. And what I remember from that speech is his two key pieces of advice, which were buy low, sell high, and there's no free lunch. And I thought to myself as a eager young student, wow, I could be home on the farm riding my dirt bike right now. Why am I listening to this drivel? And then, as a young, aspiring professional and business person, as an entrepreneur, what happens in your career, I find, is that you get sucked into the minutia and details of whatever it is you're becoming an expert at, and you lose sight of these tried and true pieces of advice that are simple yet powerful. If you remember them and use them and let them guide the way that you go through your business career. When you become more experienced, if you're smart, you come back to realizing that 99% or 95% or some really big percent of everything that you face on a day-to-day basis is just crap. It doesn't matter. What matters is focusing on some very key things that are always true and are how you make money. And with that in mind, so a couple of those things, for example, would be buy low and sell high, and there's no such thing as a free lunch. So with that in mind, today we're going to talk about the break-even equation, fixed and variable costs, contribution margins, and as I said, the break-even formula. And the reason we're going to do that is because it highlights for us what I think is the most important thing in business, which is to focus on, to make money, you focus on your contribution margin, your overheads, and your volumes. That's it. Those are three things, and you do it in that order: contribution margin, fixed costs, which are your overheads, and your volume of business. Okay, so what is the break-even formula? We're going to do that. We're going to calculate break-even both in dollars and in units. We'll start with units. I created a little chart for you here. We'll see if you can, I think you're able to read that on screen. So I'll put it back up in a second. It's odd for me because it reverses, so it looks like it's showing backwards. I actually reshot this whole show because I didn't think it was working the first time. I freaked myself out. Break even in units is equal to fixed costs divided by your contribution margin. What is a contribution margin? A price per unit minus your variable cost per unit. So you buy something which, or you produce something which is costing you $30 per unit in the example that we're going to use. You sell it for $50 per unit. That's a $20 contribution margin. Okay, let me show you the example again. So if you have $1 million fixed costs, you have a $20 contribution margin. You have to divide those two. You have to produce 50,000 units to break even. 50,000 units at a $20 contribution margin per unit covers your $1 million of fixed costs. All right, let's move into calculating your break even in dollars as opposed to units. That formula is fixed costs divided by your contribution margin percentage. Last time we did it in contribution margin dollars. Now we're doing contribution margin percentage. So let's use the same example. This is number 2 below. So you've got your fixed cost of $1 million divided by your contribution margin percentage, which you take 50 minus 30 is $20, divided by 50 is a 40% contribution margin. 1 million divided by 40% is $2.5 million in revenue. So for $2.5 million in revenue, gives you $1 million of contribution margin to cover your $1 million of fixed overhead, which means that you break even. That's the formula. So many businesses forget that. Entrepreneurs don't necessarily know it. I mean, obviously, sophisticated, educated entrepreneurs do it, but people starting out their business, they just lose sight of that, I find. Let's talk about a couple of the components of this. When we say fixed costs, it doesn't just have to be your fixed costs of operating the business. Let's say you want to calculate how much revenue you need to do to make more than zero, to make more than break even. Let's say you want to make $300,000 for the year. No problem. Add $300,000 to your fixed costs. So 1 million plus another 300,000, so 1.3 million. use the formula that way. Simple. What are variable costs when you're doing this? Most important thing is not to overthink this, because very few costs are truly variable. Very few costs are truly fixed. This is not a science, it's an art. Be consistent, focus on the big things that matter. Variable costs are costs that go up and down with your revenue, with the volume of business that you're doing. Think about direct materials, direct labor if they're not on salary, if they're just working by the hour to produce whatever you have to produce. So direct materials, direct labor. Freight is a very variable cost. Sales commissions are purely variable or typical, unless there's a draw component to them that's a fixed and non-refundable. Production supplies would be a good variable cost. So those are what variable costs are. Fixed costs are everything that are not variable. Okay, so fixed costs. Don't get hung up on step fixed costs. A step fixed cost is if you have one employee, and then you do a bit more business. Now you need another employee, so your fixed costs didn't go like this forever. They went like this, and then they went like that, and they went I got to hire some more people, and I got to hire some more people, and so they step up. Don't get hung up on this stuff. You can recalculate this thing with every new reality. The important part is that you're focused on making money, which means your contribution margin, keep your overheads low, and then your volume, okay, in that order. My experience is when I walk into a troubled company, a company that needs to change, they've entirely lost sight of this equation. They start commingling things. The biggest sin I find is they have an auditor, delivers audited statements, gives them some advice, and they focus on gross margin. Well, gross margin is your revenue minus your cost of sales. Your cost of sales has a whole bunch of stuff in there that's not variable. It is not the same as a contribution margin, right? So you got direct overheads, which are probably fixed, indirect overheads, which are definitely fixed. A lot of companies you're manufacturing, you have amortization in there. You have all sorts of stuff in there which cloud the picture and cause you to make bad management decisions. Focus on contribution margin. Focus on things that are just truly variable. I did a file last year, a turnaround that went outstanding, and at the end of the day, I just focused on direct materials and for contribution margin and forgot about everything else. It's not that there weren't other variable costs, it's just that they weren't as big and it didn't matter. So I knew that if my direct materials were within this little bandwidth, I was going to make money because I had enough volume and I knew what my overheads were. Now the biggest thing for me was contribution margin, and I just forgot about all the little details and focused on my cost of materials. We were a success. Again, so you're building a business plan, you're an entrepreneur, you're doing a turnaround, preparing a turnaround plan, focus on this equation, focus on its components, and you're going to be a lot more successful than if you get hung up on a bunch of details that you're going to find don't really matter. Thank you for listening. This was a quick shot on the Martinis with Scott channel. Please check out our content, YouTube and Apple Podcasts, Martinis with Scott channel. You like it, please subscribe. Feel free to leave comments, chip in on this, ask questions, suggest topics, whatever you want to do. Thank you.